Mr. President,
Senator from Iowa.
for the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, I'd like to proceed this way. I would make some short comments, and then I'd like to defer to Senator Whitehouse, and then I would ask unanimous consent. I think we'll soon be able to pass the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Reauthorization Act. I reintroduced this measure this year with Senator Whitehouse. The bill before us is almost the same as the one that the Judiciary Committee cleared by voice vote in the 114th Congress, and it's very similar to the one we hotlined last year. We hotlined it in February, and all the members of this chamber had 6 months to review it. We had one objection, and we cleared it earlier this week. The bill would extend a federal law known as the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act for 5 more years. The centerpiece of this 1974 legislation, which Congress last extended 15 years ago in 2002, is its core protection for youth. These core protections call for juveniles to be kept out of adult facilities except in very rare instances. They ensure that juveniles will be kept separated from adult inmates whenever they're housed in adult facilities. They call for reducing disproportionate minority contact in state juvenile justice systems, and states adhering to these requirements receive yearly formula grants to support their juvenile justice systems. This bill would promote greater accountability in government spending. The Judiciary Committee that I chair heard from multiple whistleblowers that reforms are urgently needed to restore the integrity of the formula grant programs that are the centerpiece of our current juvenile justice law. The Justice Department's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention administers this formula grant program. This program would be continued for 5 more years under the bill, but the Justice Department would have to do more oversight of this bill if it's enacted. This bill also calls for evidence-based programs to be accorded priority in the funding. The goal is to ensure that scarce federal resources for juvenile justice will be devoted mostly to the programs that research shows have the greatest merit and will yield the best results for these young people. Finally, I want to take this opportunity to thank our many co-sponsors. This bill is truly a bipartisan effort, and many senators contributed provisions to strengthen this bill since we introduced it last April. The bill reflects the latest scientific research on what works best with at-risk adolescents. At this point, I would ask if the presiding officer would turn the floor over to Senator Whitehouse. And I ask that, I want to thank Senator Whitehouse for being so persistent in this effort as well, and thank him for his great help.
The Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Grassley has been a wonderful colleague in this effort. It is the culmination of years of work, including multiple committee hearings, briefings at home in Rhode Island and elsewhere, and really working the regular order of the Senate to get this done. And Chairman Grassley has both been patient and persistent, and I really appreciate his leadership. I want to thank also our ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, Senator Feinstein, for her work. And I want to thank Senator Rand Paul. He would have liked to have seen a stronger bill, but it simply, as would we have, by the way, and he held on for a while, hoping that we could strengthen it, but it turned out there was objection to that, and he was gracious about yielding, and now we are able to move forward bipartisan and unanimously. The history of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquent Prevention Act is a noble history. It's because of this law that children aren't locked up in adult prisons any longer. It's because of this law that children don't get placed in solitary confinement for extended periods, or shackled when they are arrested for things like running away from home or not coming to school. But it had been a while since this bill was updated. The last time it was reauthorized was 13 years ago, and we've learned a lot about adolescent development and the best practices for dealing with children in those 13 years. So we're moving forward today. I look forward to working with my chairman on the broad-based criminal justice reform that he is championing in the committee, but there's no reason we shouldn't go forward with getting juvenile justice right while we move on to other areas. And I particularly want to thank him and recognize the groups involved for the patient work that was done over many years with all sorts of interested groups. We had to make this right. We wanted to minimize conflict. We wanted to maximize what we were able to accomplish. And the result is that we have over 150 organizations that have endorsed this legislation, from the ACLU to the National Association that supports probation and parole officers, from Boys Town to the National Association of Counties and the National Center for Victims of Crime. The bill focuses, the way it should, on evidence-based and trauma-informed programs that have emerged in the last 13 years. It focuses on protecting juveniles who are held in adult facilities, making sure that they are fully separated in sight and sound from adult inmates. It limits the narrow circumstances under which they may be confined in isolation, and it requires data-driven approaches to reduce ethnic and racial disparities. We recognize that kids now are much more vulnerable to substance abuse issues and that they too face mental health challenges, and we try to bring this bill together so that states have to provide appropriate treatment and recognition when the cause of what's going on in that child's life is substance abuse or a mental health challenge. We make it a good deal harder to incarcerate for the status offenses. A status offense is an offense that wouldn't even be an offense if an adult did it. It's only because you're a child that it's even an offense at all. Skipping school or running away from home and so forth. There are better ways to deal with those children than incarcerating them, and we steer in this direction, promoting the community-based alternatives to detention. We have, for instance, community courts in Rhode Island that work really, really well, where the family is engaged, the child is engaged, the community is engaged. They really learn a lesson from what they did. They have to do something helpful in order to kind of remediate themselves with their community. It's been very successful. So there are real things that can be done here. And of course, separating a child from their family in order to try to improve their situation is usually something that backfires. You need to have the family engaged. Consistent with Senator Portman's remarks, we also recognize that very often, some of the times that children get in trouble, it's because they have been traumatized. They have been either the victims of violence themselves or witness to violence in ways that have created trauma, and in many cases are sadly the victims of child sex trafficking. So we focus on states identifying and responding to those particular children to make sure, if that's what's behind what's going on, that those needs are met. Simple things. We ban the use of shackles on girls once they're pregnant. Shouldn't be asking too much, and it's about time that we stopped shackling girls, particularly pregnant girls. And last, something near and dear to my chairman's heart, it improves the accountability and the oversight of the federal grants program. I know that has been a goal that he has pursued for a long time. The chairman is one of the most determined members of the Senate when it comes to transparency and accountability, and so I'm very pleased to be his partner in that particular piece of the bill. With that, I'll yield the floor back to Chairman Grassley so that he may take us through the formal steps of passing this law. It's a very happy moment for me, and I extend my appreciation to Chairman Grassley.
And once again, thanks to Senator Whitehouse.
Senator from Iowa.
Once again, thanks to Senator Whitehouse for his cooperation and working so hard over the course of the last two Congresses to get this done. So now I give you my unanimous consent request that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S 860 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S 860, a bill to reauthorize and improve the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act of 1974 and for other purposes.
Okay.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Okay. I ask unanimous consent that the Grassley amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, and the bill as amended be considered read a third time.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill.
Is there any further debate on the bill? See, hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
I ask unanimous
The
consent.
bill,
I'm sorry. Go.
the bill as amended is passed.
I ask unanimous consent that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.